Let me ask you something. Have you ever had one of those days where you're just running on fumes? Like, no matter how hard you try to stay awake, your eyelids are like little lead curtains just begging to close? Now, imagine being in that exact state, but you're at work.
The boss is nearby.
The pressure's high. You know you can't slip up. And yet it happens. You doze off. Just for a second. Or maybe a few minutes. Now stop and think. What happens next? A write-up? A warning? A pink slip? Or something you never expected in a million years? Well, this isn't just about falling asleep at work. This is about what followed. What the boss did that left everyone speechless, even viral on TikTok and trending across YouTube Shorts. And yes, by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what happened. So don't go anywhere because this story isn't what you think it is. You didn't click on this video by accident. Something in the title pulled at your curiosity. Maybe it's because deep down you know what it feels like to be exhausted and overlooked. Maybe you've been in situations where one wrong move could change everything. Or maybe you're just hoping that, just once, the world would react with understanding instead of judgment. I get it. And I promise, what you're about to hear isn't just another workplace story. This one hits different. It's raw, emotional, and real. You're going to feel it. You're going to question a few things. You might even see yourself in the person at the heart of it all. So, let's rewind the clock just a little. Meet Lila, 24. Lives in a studio apartment she can barely afford. Works double shifts at a downtown cafe just to keep her lights on. No family nearby. No backup plan. Just her and her grind. She's one of those people you walk past every day without realizing the weight she's carrying. Smiles at customers. Makes perfect lattes. Clears tables in between orders. But what you don't see are the late nights she spends crying in the bathroom because rent's due again, and the tips just aren't cutting it. You don't see her falling asleep on the train ride home, or eating crackers for dinner because she's saving every dollar for her student loans. She's invisible. Until one moment changed everything. It was a Monday, slow, gray, and cold. The kind of day that hangs heavy in your bones. Lila was working the morning shift. She hadn't slept in 2 days. She'd picked up a late catering gig the night before, then pulled an overnight cleaning job just to make an extra $40. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her hands were trembling. But she clocked in anyway. Because she always did. That was her way, show up no matter what. Around 10:30 a.m., after the morning rush had trickled down to a few scattered customers typing away on laptops, she sat down in the back of the cafe just for a second. Just to rest her feet. Just to close her eyes for a breath. That's all she meant to do. But before she knew it, she was out. Asleep. Right there, at the employee table, head resting on her arm. No one woke her. No one noticed. At least, not at first. Now here's where things take a turn. Because what happened next is what brought this video into your feed. The cafe owner, Mr. Raymond Holt, a man known in the local community for being strict, precise, and painfully punctual, walked in just minutes later. He doesn't normally come in on Mondays. But that day,
He did.
the staff froze.
The air changed.
You could feel it. Lila was still asleep in the back. And everyone waited to see what he'd do when he saw her. And what he did, well, that's the moment that's been racking up millions of views on Reels and blowing up on threads like r/work reform and r/humans being brothers. Listen, I know some of you might be thinking, alright, but what's the big deal? People fall asleep at work all the time. So what? But trust me when I say, this isn't one of those stories with a predictable ending. This wasn't about rules or punishment or even some viral TikTok prank. This was something deeper. Something that made people rethink how we treat others, especially when they're struggling. Because Mr. Holt didn't do what you think he did. In fact, what he didn't do is what shocked everyone the most. And the reason behind his reaction? It has roots in a story from decades ago, a story no one in the cafe had ever heard.
Until that day.
Now I want you to stay with me. I know your time is valuable. You've got a million other things you could be doing right now. But if you stay until the end, I promise you're going to walk away with something real. Something you can't scroll past. You'll get the full story, start to finish. No clickbait. No dragged-out fluff. Just the truth. And if you've ever been tired, underestimated, or just plain human, you need to hear this. Because this story isn't just about Lila. It's about the pressure so many of us carry in silence. It's about kindness in unexpected places. It's about second chances. And yes, about the internet's wild reaction when one man broke every expectation and flipped the script. You'll meet the people who judged her, the coworkers who whispered behind her back, the one regular customer who stood up for her in the comments section before the video ever went viral. You'll see how one act of compassion sparked a chain reaction that changed not just Lila's life, but the entire cafe culture itself. And you'll learn the secret Mr. Holt had been carrying all these years, the one no one could have guessed. So buckle up, because this story is real. It's emotional. It's layered. And it's going to stick with you long after you've clicked away. But here's the deal. You've got to stay till the end. Because the moment everyone's been talking about, the one that left viewers speechless, even made a few cry, that's still coming. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. And just as the staff stood frozen, as Mr. Holt slowly walked toward the back where Lila was sleeping, something happened that none of them could explain. The hush in the cafe was heavy, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tap of a spoon against a mug. Mr. Holt, tall and sharp in his charcoal gray coat, took slow, deliberate steps toward the back room. No one dared breathe too loudly. His shoes clicked against the tile floor, echoing like a countdown. Lila was still asleep, unaware of the storm walking toward her. A few employees exchanged nervous glances. One barista, Jamie, looked like she wanted to warn Lila, maybe jostle her awake, but she froze, scared of drawing attention to herself. After all, Mr. Holt wasn't known for second chances. He had fired someone last year for leaving the register open for 5 minutes.
No one forgot that.
So, naturally, everyone expected the worst. Maybe that's why no one moved when he reached the doorway and saw her, slumped over the break table, arms curled like a child's, her breathing shallow and even. But Mr. Holt didn't yell. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. He stood there in silence, just watching her. And for a split second, something flickered in his eyes, something no one could quite place. Then, without a word, he turned to Jamie and said, "Make her some tea. Herbal. No caffeine." That was it. No lecture. No termination. Just a quiet instruction. He walked back out into the dining area, sat at his usual corner table, and pulled out his notebook, as if nothing had happened at all. And that's when the whispers started. By the time Lila woke up 10 minutes later, a steaming cup of chamomile sat in front of her with a note tucked beneath it. "Take 5 more minutes. Then come talk to me." Her hands trembled as she read it. Her heart raced. But what stunned her even more than the note was the fact that she still had a job. What none of her coworkers knew, and what Lila would soon find out, is that Mr. Holt wasn't just the cafe owner. He was also a man with a past far more complicated than his reputation let on. Years ago, before he owned Brewline Cafe, he had been a corporate executive in New York, living in high-rise suites and making 6 figures. But that life ended abruptly after a mental health breakdown no one in his inner circle saw coming. Burnout had pushed him to the edge, and after collapsing in his office during a late-night strategy meeting, he spent 3 months recovering in silence. When he came back, everything had changed: his job, his circle, his priorities. That was the beginning of Brewline Cafe. A second chance born from his own fall. But no one at the cafe knew that story. He never spoke about it. Not until that day. Meanwhile, Lila was spiraling. After she finally made her way to Mr. Holt's table, heart pounding in her throat, she apologized profusely, tears threatening to spill. She expected a warning, maybe even a guilt trip. What she got instead was a simple question. "When was the last time you slept 8 hours?" She couldn't answer. Her voice caught in her throat. That's when Mr. Holt said something she didn't expect from someone like him. He told her he had once fallen asleep during a $1 million pitch in a Manhattan boardroom and still wakes up some nights thinking about that failure. "But here's what I learned," he said, tapping the edge of his cup. "Exhaustion is not laziness. It's a warning light. And most of us ignore it until it's too late. The words hit her like a wave. It was the first time in a long time someone had seen her, not just as an employee but as a human being hanging by a thread. That one conversation set off a ripple inside the cafe. Staff began opening up, quietly at first. Stories trickled in about side jobs, student debt, sick relatives, and rent hikes. One server, Marco, had been living out of his car for 3 weeks without telling anyone. Another, Dana, admitted she had fainted once during a shift from not eating all day. Suddenly, Lila's moment didn't feel so isolated. It was like a light had been turned on, and the shadows people were hiding and were now visible. Mr. Holt began leaving anonymous meal vouchers in the break room. He revised the schedule to ensure no one worked more than 10 hours a day. And he started closing the cafe an hour early every Wednesday, something that shocked even the loyal customers. Mental health break, he wrote on the window sign. And just like that, Brewline started trending, not just for its signature matcha latte, but for its workplace culture. Videos about the cafe hit YouTube Shorts and TikTok. People commented things like, "This is what leadership should look like, and we need more bosses like this." Others shared their own experiences, falling asleep at work, crying in back rooms, getting fired for simply being tired. Lila read every comment. Some made her cry. Some made her feel seen. But one stuck with her. Sometimes, it takes falling asleep to finally wake up. Still, not everyone was on board. A few employees began to resent the attention. One of them, Kevin, who had been at the cafe the longest, started questioning Lila's integrity. "She sleeps on the job, and now she's the face of workplace empathy," he muttered behind her back. His jealousy began to grow, especially after local media outlets reached out to interview Mr. Holt and Lila about their now viral story. Kevin believed the cafe was turning into a spectacle. He even began secretly recording conversations, hoping to catch Lila making a mistake. Anything to knock her down. He wasn't the only one uneasy. A corporate franchise from the next block oversent a lawyer's letter claiming Brewline was making unsubstantiated claims about superior employee treatment in their social media marketing. It was absurd, but it created tension. Lila felt like she was standing in the eye of a storm. Her life had shifted from being invisible to being on a stage. And through it all, there was a lingering question. Why did Mr. Holt really react the way he did? Yes, he had his story. But was there more to it? Why now? Why Lila? And why was he suddenly so invested in changing the cafe's entire model overnight? Some whispered that Mr. Holt had lost someone close to him, a daughter, a niece, someone who had worked herself to death. Others speculated he was preparing to sell the cafe and wanted a redemption story to go with it. The theories ran wild, and the truth still hadn't surfaced. Meanwhile, Lila began receiving messages from someone anonymous. At first, they were harmless. Little notes slipped into her locker or found taped under her tips jar. Careful who you trust. Not everyone's happier here. The truth is deeper than you think. At first, she brushed it off as Kevin's passive-aggressive antics. But the handwriting didn't match. And then one day, a message arrived at her apartment. No return address, just a piece of brown paper with 3 words. He owes her. That's when the pieces started to unravel. And just when she thought she might be imagining it all, Lila found a photograph buried in the drawer of the break room filing cabinet. A picture of Mr. Holt from years ago, standing beside a young woman who looked eerily familiar. Same eyes. Same chin. The woman was wearing a Brewline cafe apron, but the timestamp was from before the cafe had even opened to the public.
Who was she?
Why was the photo hidden? And why did Mr. Holt keep looking at Lila like he knew her from a life she never lived? The questions were piling up. The walls were closing in. And Lila was about to discover a secret so deeply buried, so emotionally tangled, it would not only rewrite everything she thought she knew about Mr. Holt, but would also force her to confront a truth about herself she never saw coming. The days that followed felt like walking across cracked ice. Lila tried to shake the unease, but it clung to her like fog. She couldn't stop thinking about that photograph, the one she'd found buried in the break room drawer, the woman with her face almost standing beside Mr. Holt like they were family. Or more than family. She'd taken a copy of the photo with her and stared at it nightly, comparing every feature.
There were subtle differences, yes.
But something deep in her gut told her this wasn't coincidence. Especially not after the anonymous note that said, "He owes her." That phrase haunted her, echoing in her mind when the cafe got quiet or when Holt looked at her with that unreadable expression he wore so often lately. And things weren't getting any quieter. In fact, they were getting louder, on the internet, in the community, and behind the cafe doors. The viral video had snowballed, especially after someone shared a TikTok montage of Lila's story with trending hashtags like #WorkplaceWellness, #BossGoals, and #MentalHealthMatters. The cafe had accidentally become a movement. Influencers showed up to record their own takes. YouTubers created reaction videos analyzing Mr. Holt's unusual empathy, and even daytime talk shows wanted interviews. And while the outside world praised the cafe's new direction, tension inside it thickened like heavy cream. Kevin grew more paranoid and bitter, watching Lila become something like a local hero while he slipped into irrelevance. He started digging through old schedules, tax forms, anything he could find. His obsession wasn't just jealousy anymore. It had curdled into something darker. He was convinced that Mr. Holt and Lila shared a secret, and he wouldn't rest until he exposed it. What Kevin didn't know was that Lila had already started her own investigation. She couldn't ask Holt directly. She didn't trust him entirely, not anymore. So, she went to the town records office, combing through property deeds and business registrations. That's when she uncovered something startling. Brewline Cafe had originally been registered under a different name 5 years ago, Thea's Table. But there was no public record of the business ever opening under that name. And the registrant? A woman named Thea Marin. Lila stared at the name for a long time, her hands trembling. She had no idea who Thea Marin was. But the resemblance in the photo couldn't be a fluke. There was more. Digging through obituaries, she found a listing for Thea Marin, age 23.
Deceased.
Cause of death: suicide. The date of her passing? Just 1 month before Brewline Cafe officially opened its doors. Lila's stomach dropped. She ran outside, heart pounding, the cool evening air hitting her face like a slap. She couldn't breathe. Holt had built the cafe right after Thea died, named it something else, buried her memory in the foundations. And for some reason, Lila, who had only moved to this town a year ago, was now standing in the center of it all. Was it a coincidence that she'd landed this job? Or had he known exactly who she was? And if so, why? The emotional weight of the discovery was crushing, but there was no time to process. Because just then, another twist hit like a lightning bolt. A video leaked, not from an influencer or a news outlet, but from inside the cafe. Security camera footage showing the moment Lila fell asleep on the job. It showed her slumped over the table, vulnerable, fragile. But it didn't stop there. The footage included Mr. Holt standing over her, watching silently for far too long. People online started asking why he didn't wake her. Why he stood there staring like he'd seen a ghost. Theories exploded. Comments flooded in. Some sympathetic, others suspicious. Conspiracy channels picked it up, calling it a modern-day psychological experiment, speculating that Brewline was a staged project, not a real cafe. One video, tagged with #exposed and #truecrime-vibes, even suggested that Lila was an actress, hired to promote a narrative around corporate redemption. Lila was blindsided. Kevin denied leaking the footage, but she knew it had to be him. The look in his eyes the next day confirmed it. But before she could confront him, Holt pulled her aside. For the first time, he looked shaken. Not angry, shaken. He told her the footage had been stored in an offline archive. "Someone went through my personal files to get it," he said. "Not the cafe system. Mine." That's when it hit Lila. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was sabotage. Someone wanted to destroy everything they'd built. Not just the cafe's reputation, but Holt's name, and hers too. And then, just as the cafe was barely staying afloat amidst a new wave of online scrutiny, Lila got a letter. Not a message. A physical letter. Mailed to her apartment, no return address, with a single black and white photograph enclosed. The photo was grainy, dated, and clearly from a different decade. It showed a little girl with a familiar face sitting on a man's shoulders. The girl had Thea's smile. But the man, he wasn't Mr. Holt. The handwriting on the back simply read, "Ask him who her real father was." Lila sat frozen on her couch, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a story of workplace burnout anymore. It was a story of buried family secrets, of grief left to rot, of identities tangled in lies. And somehow, she was in the middle of it all. The cafe was no longer just a cafe. It was the stage where past and present were colliding, and something was about to erupt. Just when she thought things couldn't get more tangled, the power went out. Not in her apartment, but at Brewline. In the middle of the evening rush, the espresso machines died. The lights cut off. The music stopped. And a single candle appeared on the center table, with a note beneath it. "Tonight, the truth will be served." And that's when Lila realized this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The moment the lights went out at Brewline, an eerie silence swept across the cafe, cutting through the chatter, laughter, and hum of machines like a blade. Customers looked around, some fumbling for their phones, others frozen in confusion. Lila stood near the counter, heart racing, eyes adjusting to the flickering glow of that one candle in the center of the room. Everything about the scene felt orchestrated, almost theatrical. The note that lay beneath the candle was handwritten, just like the others, but this time, there was no ambiguity. "Tonight, the truth will be served." The words echoed in her mind as she stepped closer, barely breathing. Kevin emerged from the kitchen then, pale and wide-eyed, whispering that the circuit breaker was still intact and none of the fuses had blown. That's when it became clear, this blackout wasn't accidental. Someone had planned every second of it. Mr. Holt entered a moment later, holding a flashlight and looking visibly disturbed. He hadn't orchestrated this. In fact, he looked like a man who'd lost control of his own story. That was when a projector blinked on. No one knew where it had come from, and a video began to play on the back wall of the cafe. Grainy, vintage footage lit up the space. A young woman dancing in an empty restaurant, laughing, carefree, twirling in a red apron that matched Brewline's current uniform. Lila watched, stunned, as the woman turned toward the camera. It was Thea. Not just resembling her, actually her. She was full of life, energy pouring out of her like sunshine. But what made Lila's knees buckle was the moment Holt stepped into frame. Younger, smiling, staring at Thea with unmistakable love in his eyes. The date on the corner of the video was from 8 years ago. This was before Thea's death.
Before Brewline. Before everything.
The cafe was dead silent as the film played. Mr. Holt didn't try to stop it. He just stood there, chest rising and falling with short, rapid breaths, like he'd been holding this in for too long. When the video ended, he stepped forward and, for the first time, spoke the truth. He told everyone Thea wasn't just someone he had hired, she was his daughter. But not in the traditional sense. She was the daughter of his late best friend, a man who had died in a car crash when Thea was just 7. Holt had promised to look after her, but over time, that promise became something messier. He tried to be her father, but also her boss, her guide, her business partner. And when Thea began to struggle with her mental health, Holt made the mistake of pushing her harder instead of listening. "I thought I was helping," he said, voice breaking. "But I was silencing her pain. And one day, she couldn't carry it anymore." Thea had taken her own life just weeks before they were supposed to open Thea's Table, the cafe they dreamed of building together. In his grief, Holt renamed the cafe and buried her name and memory, believing that forgetting might ease the guilt. But then Lila showed up. And she looked so much like Thea, not just in appearance but in spirit. At first, Holt dismissed it as coincidence. But when he discovered that Lila's biological mother was adopted and had once gone by the name T. Marin in medical records, everything unraveled. Lila wasn't a stranger. She was Thea's half-sister, the result of a teenage relationship Thea's mother had before ever meeting her father. Lila had never known this. Holt had, and it crushed him. He hadn't told her out of fear, of losing her, of reopening wounds, of the public questioning why he'd hired someone who shared such a twisted connection to his past. Lila was speechless, her hands trembling as she processed everything. Her entire identity had just been rewritten. She wasn't just an employee who fell asleep on the job. She was family to a woman whose memory had shaped everything around her. And Holt's strange behavior, the way he looked at her that day in the break room, the hesitation, the long silences, it all made sense now. The cafe wasn't just a tribute. It was an apology, an unfinished love letter to someone he couldn't save. But just when everyone thought the night had revealed its deepest secret, another twist emerged. Kevin, who had been silent until now, stepped forward and dropped a folder on the floor. Its contents scattered: emails, receipts, legal papers. He had discovered that the property Bruline was built on wasn't fully paid for. The original co-owner was Thea. And because she had no living heirs, at least until now, the cafe technically belonged, in part, to Lila. Legally, she was entitled to half of everything. Holt confirmed it, admitting he had been quietly putting money aside in case Lila ever found out. "I didn't want you to think I brought you here for that," he said. "I brought you here because I saw her in you, and I couldn't ignore it." Lila looked around the cafe, the same walls that had witnessed laughter, burnout, heartbreak, and healing. She thought of the night she fell asleep at the counter, exhausted, ashamed. Back then, she had no idea she was sleeping inside a legacy she was born into, a grief she had inherited without knowing. The power flickered back on then, humming softly as lights blinked to life. The customers, still stunned, began to clap, not for a spectacle, but for a human moment shared so vulnerably, so truthfully, that it transcended the awkwardness of broken lights and exposed secrets. Bruline wasn't just a cafe anymore. It was a testament to pain, to redemption, to the quiet courage it takes to show up when your soul is cracked open. In the days that followed, Lila and Holt made peace, not as boss and employee, but as two people linked by loss and responsibility. They didn't turn Bruline into a shrine, but they did change the name back to Thea's Table. Not because it was poetic, but because it was right. Kevin surprisingly stayed on. Whatever spite he had was burned away by the weight of the truth. He and Lila would never be close, but something like respect had settled between them. And just as things seemed to settle, one last envelope arrived. No address. Just a note inside with one line. "There's more than one kind of family. You found yours." Lila smiled, folded the note, and slipped it into her apron pocket. The espresso machine hissed back to life behind her as the morning rush began. She took a deep breath, stepped behind the counter, and served the first customer of the day with a warm smile that felt, for the first time in a long time, completely real.